Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, my name is Patrick Norris, and I am so excited to guide you into our brand new platform called Red Ink Revival. I'm so glad to have you with us wherever you're getting this podcast or in the video version of YouTube. Our vision is to grow leaders through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. We believe that driven leaders ought to know what they're driven by. We move beyond the great leadership tactics and executable principles to dig into the emotional circuits of what's driving you. We want to know why you shut down, why you overreact, why you stew in your frustrations. We want to know why you want to execute great techniques but somehow get stuck. We even want to know why we as smart leaders have a propensity to do dumb things. We all know that our best intentions and best principles and the best teachings can be hijacked by our past griefs, losses, and traumas from childhood on up. My goal is to bring high content value that addresses where leaders live. In future episodes, I'll be interviewing experts, neuroscientists, psychologists, therapists, marketplace leaders, and pastors. We're going to dive into things like how attachment styles impact our perceptions, or how leadership boundaries keep us healthy. What of a codependent leadership profile shows up for us, and just so much more. We won't simply tell you what you should do, but why you do what you do and how to rewire and restore leadership joy. This podcast series is for all leaders in all spheres of leadership, from the marketplace to church and nonprofits to parenting in the home. I'm a pastor with over 30 years of senior leadership experiences, so be aware that many of our interviews are going to bend back into church world illustrations, as that's where so many of my experiences are. However, the principles will cross-pollinate no matter what sphere you lead in. And you'll probably come to know we are bringing wholehearted leadership to pastors, church staffs, and marketplace leaders, those who are actual stockholders of their local church, to bring a revival to the world around them. We'll drop new content every week, shooting for each Thursday of the month. I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this podcast, like it, and comment in the reviews. If this content is valuable to you, I'd ask you to help us get the word out by sharing on your social media platforms. Before we begin the interview today, I want to tell you about one of our great Red Ink sponsors. Hey guys, let me take a minute to tell you about our friends at Marketing with Wisdom, a Christian agency connecting brands with their community through relationship-centered marketing. They provide comprehensive branding, marketing, and advertising solutions. Marketing with Wisdom is a full-service Christian marketing agency that serves clients in various industries. They work with churches, businesses, nonprofits, musicians, authors, and podcasts, among others. My friend, Wisdom Moon, is the founder and CEO. He has 15 years of experience in marketing, business, and Christian music, as well as over 20 years of experience in church and nonprofit ministry. The entire Marketing with Wisdom team has helped numerous brands with branding, consulting, marketing, and advertising, including Red Ink Revival. They consistently deliver ideas and solutions that have exceeded our and other clients' expectations. What I love is they do everything in an open and transparent and collaborative environment. Go check them out, marketingwithwisdom.com. Then tell them Patrick Norris at Red Ink Revival sent you. They will love you and treat you like family. That's marketingwithwisdom.com. As we launch into today's episode, I want you to know that the entire month of January, we'll be interviewing our anchor guests and teammates in the Red Ink Tribe. These amazing people feel a specific calling from God on their lives to be voices carrying the mission in the Red Ink Revival platform. Our desire is to introduce them with their backstories so you can engage their content and have a context of them. This week, I'm so excited to introduce to you our anchor influencer, Joyce Hill. She has served as the organizational director of Fortune 500 companies like Sprint Telecommunications, State Street, H&R Block, and Chrysler Financial. Joyce has worked with executives in individualized coaching, multi-tier feedback, personal development plans, and change management. Her work with these organizations includes cultural change, talent development, succession planning, team interventions, performance management, retention strategies, and employee engagement. Joyce is also certified at the highest level of expertise in behavioral personality assessments. From her academic background and time in C-suites, her experience and rich knowledge base has been catalyzed for the last 12 years as an adjunct professor at Avila University, where she facilitates numerous courses in the Masters of Science in Organizational Development. Today, she is also honored to serve on the Board of Counselors at Avila University. As you can imagine, we are beyond blessed to have Joyce on our team in our very first episode together. Thanks again for joining us today. Let's go now into this week's episode. Well, today we have Joyce Hill in the house, and I'm so excited to have her as a part of our Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. Joyce has an amazing background in business, the marketplace. She has been in executive suites of Fortune 500 companies and has worked with the government, contracted with multiple different people, just a rich background in business. And I love that she's on our team. Joyce, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited to talk about the things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, how did you get to where you are today from a professional perspective? What caused you to actually become an organizational director?
Wow, that's a great question, because when I started off in the workplace, never did I imagine I was going to be doing what I'm doing today. I landed a position with a company, a nationwide company, and it was interesting because very quickly I rose to the ranks of leadership. I didn't know a thing about what I was doing. I was just told I was a leader and made a leader. I wasn't even sure I could spell leader at that point. But it was quite the ride to begin there. But that position, I was with that company for a long time. And that position eventually was eliminated. But just prior to that position being eliminated, the company was downsizing. It was privately owned. It was one of the largest family-owned corporations in America at that time. And they had decided that they wanted to go public and to sell the organization. And so they were beginning to downsize. They wanted to make sure that the company looked good on paper, so there was a lot of job elimination. But at that point, I had not finished my college degree, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be back out into the marketplace, don't have a college degree. Am I marketable? Are people going to just believe that I've done what I've done because I don't have any paper that says I have this knowledge?
Yeah.
And so I decided to go back to school, and I started back at college just prior to my job being eliminated. But it was through that decision to go back to school to get my bachelor's degree in human resource management that through networking, a couple of students in my class worked for a large telecommunication organization. And so through that networking, I was able to land an interview with that company in their training department and got the job, very excited, got the job. And it was in that organization that I realized that I had already been doing the work as an organizational development practitioner.
Wow.
But just didn't have a label for it, didn't know what it was. And that organization also was a catalyst for my own personal development. They offered me a lot of training and education and awareness, and I took more assessments on myself than I think I ever took my entire life. I knew more about me than I think I ever wanted to know, and some of the stuff was pretty scary that I learned too. So let me tell you that. But it was through that too, and I was also able to rise through those ranks. And so I entered through their training door as a trainer, but then moved into the organizational development role with them and had great opportunities. Oh my goodness, I was not only able to work domestically with leaders, but I was also able to work internationally with leaders.
Wow.
And so, talk about an opportunity that almost landed in my lap, that were to be, to take place for me in my career. And again, all the development, and that's where I probably also learned the importance of feedback, because one of their mantras was, we have a feedback-rich environment.
Yeah.
And we had a feedback-rich environment.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, we certainly did.
That's rare.
Very much, but that was huge. The CEO really promoted that. That was very important for him to have that be a part of his world.
Yeah.
And he also modeled that himself, because he would share feedback that he would get on himself, which was great with the organization. But from that, I was actually wooed away from that company after a while. But before I was wooed away, because one thing I forgot to mention is that telecommunications company also paid for my master's degree. And it was such a wonderful opportunity. And the master's degree is what actually took me into the organizational development arena, because my master's is in that. It's the Master's of Science in Organizational Development. And so I was able to begin to do a lot of that work with the organization, and then I got wooed away.
Those wooings.
I know.
Sometimes those wooings happen.
Got wooed away. And I had the opportunity given to me to be the Assistant Vice President of Organizational Development for a company here in town that had been acquired by an organization back east.
Wow.
But the merger did not go as smoothly as they needed, and so there were some issues and some people issues and some process issues that were going on in the organization here locally. And so I was brought in to help them to kind of smooth some of that over.
Wow.
And I probably would have stayed with them a long time. I was only with them for a couple of years, but this was a financial company, and 9/11 occurred. We had a lot of comrades that we did business with at the World Trade Center, and in fact, their world headquarters for this company is in Boston, and we were even concerned about people on those planes that day, because we knew that 2 of them came out of Boston. But so that job was eliminated because the financial companies took a lot of hit during that time frame. But I landed on my feet in another another large financial organization. And there I actually took their training department. I was their director of organizational development, and took their training department and evolved it into the organizational development or piece for the company. And there did a lot of work around their culture, did work on, they had, their CEO at the time had been with the company a couple of years. They had brought a new CEO in. It had been run by the family for a long, long time, but they decided to bring in an outside person as their CEO. And so he had made some changes, as most CEOs do. He'd rewritten the mission statement, the vision statement, and we were beginning to do the work on values. And so one of the key things that I did when I was first in that position is that very thing, was to take those values and really inculcate them into the organization. Yep. And it ended up being a best practice for me in terms of the work that I did there. And from all of that, through all of that work, all of that journey, I finally decided to launch my own business. And so I started my own consulting company, where I then support medium to small businesses, because they need the support of an organizational development practitioner as much as the large guys do. But often they can't afford necessarily to pay those large consulting fees. And so my niche has been that small to medium-sized business owner. And to help those organizations. But like you said, though, I also did work for the federal government while I had my own company, which was a real fluke. That I wasn't even looking for that, and that just happened to come about.
You have such a rich background, especially knowing you came from Fortune 500 companies, and again, contracting with the government, contracting medium, small-sized businesses, and what your master's is in is organizational direction, has to do with the sciences of that.
That's right.
Tell us if you're embedded in the C-suite of the CEO, COO, CFO, all that, all the C's, you're in the C-suite of Fortune 500 companies. What is it that an organizational director does in those environments?
An organizational development person can work in two arenas. One is sometimes some of them are very strong on the process system side of the business. Others are very strong on the people side of the business.
Interesting.
A good balance, of course, is to be able to do a little bit of both.
Yeah, sure.
I have a tendency to lean more into the people side of the business, because when you think about an organization, changes are happening all the time. You know, we're constantly hearing that the only constant in an organization is to expect change, right? Yeah. But people don't do well with change.
Yeah.
Especially if they feel they don't have the capabilities to overcome the challenges of whatever the change is bringing to them. And so that's what an organizational development practitioner helps. It helps with that people side of things, so that when the change is occurring, and that change can be a new system, a new process, a change can even be a downsize. You know, there has to be some job eliminations for whatever reason in an organization. And people will react to that. And so we help leaders to manage through those issues that the people are dealing with when those changes occur, to minimize the impact that it has on the productivity of the organization.
Wow. And I know in conversations with you, you would take the mission, the vision, the values, and a big part of what you did was to drive it down through all the layers of the organization.
That's right.
So you are very aware of the heartbeat of the organization, and yet you are very into the heart of the people. A minute ago you said that sometimes people don't feel like they can overcome the change.
Yes.
And it's interesting because with Red Ink Revival, what we're doing is helping people understand the feeling side of life, and that there is a neurobiological circuitry that impulsively drives people, and they don't even know why. So sometimes we know that we feel like we can't do a thing, and sometimes a simple strategy is just not enough.
That's right.
Sometimes we've got to deal with more. And in your background, you are certified at the highest level of personality assessments. And this is across the board. It's not like you pigeonholed just one and you got certified there. I mean, you're so highly certified that whenever there's a new assessment that comes out, you automatically get rolled in on it because of your background. So I'm just fascinated by the people side, by the personality side, and what you learned and what that was all about. Talk to us a little bit about the personality assessments, to give us kind of backdrop as to how we will talk in the future. But these personality assessments, tell us what's that mean to you, and what did it mean to the C-suite of the organization?
Yeah, the personality assessments, and I think what's so important is that word assessment. Often when we are asked to do one of those, if you will, to engage in one of those instruments, we immediately think it's a test.
Yeah.
And with the word test, we assume right and wrong, good or bad, pass or fail, and that's not what an assessment is all about. The assessment is simply giving you a read on what makes you tick, giving you a read on your internal portions of your personality that sometimes you may not even be aware of that exist. And it's so important to understand that, because it's not just finding out how to motivate others and what makes others tick, but it's also important to do that introspection in terms of what's important to me and what makes me tick.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That's where sometimes I think leaders lack in that, in terms of they've climbed the ladder and they've reached such a height of success in their career that they don't get that feedback as often as they want. They get lots of feedback that says, you know, they were great on reaching the bottom line. They were great in increasing the stock prices. They were excellent in doing X, Y, Z. But they don't necessarily get feedback on how they went about doing that, how their behaviors are impacting people. Yeah. And that's what a personality assessment can help. So a couple of things happen with a personality assessment. There are just self-assessments that you can do where you're just self-reporting. Yeah. And of course, yes, we then are dependent on your honesty and your answers, to answer from the gut, to answer truly and not answer like you think you should answer. So you have the self-assessment. But the real rich assessments are when you do what we call a multi-rater assessment. And that's where, yes, you do a self-assessment, and then your boss or your leader, whoever you report to, would do an assessment on you.
Yeah.
If you have direct reports, they will do an assessment on you. And then your peers will do an
360,
assessment.
the 360,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And so now you're getting feedback from all around you.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is that often I find that the self-assessment is much harder. People are much harder on themselves. Bosses are very honest in the assessment. Direct reports are very honest in the assessment, and often peers are as well, because those two categories, the peers and the direct reports, are anonymous. You don't know who's saying what.
Yeah.
And that's important to understand. You do know what your boss says, and of course you're reminded of what you reported, but you don't know who said what in the other groups. But what's important to also understand is that you might find that you do something really, really well with your direct reports,
Yeah.
but your peers are saying you're terrible at it,
Yeah.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
And what's important to understand there is what's causing those differences
Yeah.
in those responses from those groups of people. Yeah. So those personality assessments, and by the way, I don't think you should ever just rely on one assessment.
Yeah.
Because that is what, to use your words, will pigeonhole you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to have a battery of assessments. So for example, one of the assessment groups that I'm certified in is the Hogan Suite. And to do the full leadership assessment, there's actually 3 different assessments that a person would take. So if you were a leader and I were administering this assessment to you, you would take what we call the coach or the leadership coach's potential report. You would also take an assessment called the challenge report, and then you would take a third one that is just labeled values report, which is really about your personal values, what motivates you. And we look at all of those together because together they tell the story of you, but independently we're only going to get a small fraction of what you're all about.
Let me take a minute and introduce you to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Retreats. These retreats are 40-plus hour experiences with psychologists, therapists, and pastors to help you dig deep into your leadership profile. These experiences from previous attenders have been testified that they are some of the greatest times in God that they have ever had. Others said this is the greatest miracle that my wife says she's ever experienced of me. I want to encourage you to listen to this testimony and join us for one of our upcoming 2020 leadership retreats.
You know, I'm a preacher, piano player, musician, minister. But just by hanging around some pretty smart people, you know, I feel like I had a pretty solid base of theology. I was solid there, but connecting the dots is very difficult for me. And it is so easy for me to believe He loves me and He's good all the time and that He only has good for me. But with that in place, I didn't question that. But why am I not experiencing that goodness, which I know is true and I don't question? Why am I not internally experiencing that? And because of the inner struggles and turmoil, getting to the core of why do I feel like I do? Because man, I was crossing a line of the inner turmoil and the inner pain was starting to act out and manifest on the outside. And then you're on dangerous territory. So let me just say, this meeting was just in time. That's not an overstatement. If I still didn't have a 16-year-old son at home, there's really nothing left for me. I'm not supposed to live there. Now I know I don't have to. But I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not. I know, in fact, that I'm not the only one. But you've got a call on you. There's something here. There's a destiny. My wife asked me, she said, what's the biggest thing you've learned or discovered? And I just had to say, I found me again. And I lost my heart. How can you give somebody else your heart if you can't even find it yourself? But my heart had a home. She's with me. Oh God, how she's with me. I'm not talking about, that ain't faith, dude. I'm talking about, we talk like 2 hours a night during this whole event, which is probably why I come in like this. But it's the most beautiful thing, because she hears words coming out of me. She's sobbing on the other end, and I'm saying, okay, now wait a minute, are those good tears or bad tears? And she can't talk and cry at the same time. But then, so the way she has to get words to come back, she has to transition from crying to laughing, because it's such a happy cry. She said, oh, this was how she ended last night. She said, what you don't understand is, because I said, will you stay with me? She answered by saying, this is the biggest miracle of my life. Why wouldn't I stay around to see the miracle to fruition? How would I describe my experience? Man, life-changing. And the reason why I say life-changing is because I think I was the oldest guy in the room at 58 years old and kind of a fourth-generation Pentecostal. I've been in a few crusades, conferences, meetings. I've been my whole life in church. But this is what the church should look like, where you can actually connect. So, I could go on and on about how do you describe it? Yeah, that's probably the best word, life-changing. How excited am I to tell others about this? Let me answer it by saying this. I can't be the only preacher's kid who was somewhat jacked in life and screwed up. And experience tells me I'm not the only one. So yeah, you might say, for all the guys that personally and professionally, your fault or somebody else's, doesn't matter. It is what it is, and you are where you are. But the question is, are you going to stay how you are? And are you going to let circumstances stay as they are? So, yeah, that would be, if that was 1 to 5, the answer is 10 plus. Because the truth is, this is the truth. People are desperate. Pastors have to have a place where they can find hope and vision and strength, security, safety, and answers.
One of the great leadership mantras is that you will never lead anybody more important than yourself, and that all great leaders fundamentally are leading themselves well. Sometimes we think about that and we think, it's about academics, it's about reading books, it's about staying on the top of the curve, learning everything we can about our roles. It's about discipline, it's about, going to work out and making sure that you have all the physical things supporting your leadership role. It's just about all that stuff. And yet, we very rarely ever dig down below the surface of that and ask, what is it that's in the emotions, the psychology, that causes a person to not actually execute those?
So
or
true.
if they're executing well on reading books, and so they have all of the business acumen down, but internally they are interpersonal skill-wise, and what causes them to melt down?
Yeah.
Or what causes them to be avoidant, what causes them to not hold accountable, what causes them to show favor to somebody over somebody else that doesn't necessarily meet a metric criteria. All of that stuff is just stirring on the inside.
That's right.
And that is where it's so important that leaders learn to lead themselves, to be wholehearted. That it's better to be a wholehearted leader that's a healthy, functional human being. It's better because you're more contented, you're happy, than being someone who meets all the metrics, who reaches all the goals, who gets the stock prices up, or grows the church, or whatever it is,
Right.
but their wife doesn't like them, and their kids wish that they had somebody else as a mom or dad.
That's right.
And right on down the line. I just think it's so interesting when we look at like organizational direction, because the technical term is the science of it. And you today, I was remiss not teeing up or highlighting the fact you're a professor at Avila University and you teach organizational direction. This is what you do. This is one of the joys of your life,
Yeah.
is taking what you learned in the work marketplace and you're reproducing it. I think it's just so awesome that you are a person that we can lean on to draw out what you've seen when you have been with high-functioning, powerful leaders, some of which is good and some not. And so we say driven leaders, they ought to know what they're driven by. In your experience with CEOs, COOs, and so on, what do you think that they just generally are driven by?
You know, just very point blank, what they're driven by is personal value.
Interesting.
They are driven by the need for respect. They are driven by the need to excel, to be successful. And there's nothing wrong with those traits. There's nothing wrong with being
Absolutely.
driven by that. Those are excellent motivators. However, how they go about achieving those things
Yeah.
is, I think, where the rub is.
Yeah.
Is because you were speaking earlier about, you know, having all of the academic smarts and all of that. And that's so true. You know, we drill into everyone that's gone to, whether you've just gone through high school or you have gone on for, you know, secondary education, but we drill in about math and history and geography and English and all of those topics. But there's one topic we don't drill down deep enough, and that's emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And
yes,
that's
yes.
often where leaders are finding themselves with some of those difficulties. So while they are looking at their need for success, acceptance, to understand and establish their own value, to increase their level of self-confidence, often how they go about trying to achieve those things is not necessarily the most productive, most effective, and most efficient way to go about it. You know, one of the things I've always told leaders when I've worked with them and coached them on things is that it's not just what you achieve, but it's how you achieve it. It's the behaviors behind how. Because getting the bottom line results is not okay if you're walking over the bloody bodies in the hallway.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of how somebody could do it in an unhealthy, dysfunctional way? The how, and it being off rails?
Oh my goodness. Yes, I can. Boy, do I have examples on that. You know, I can think of one immediately, in particular. He was a C-level individual in an organization where I was. And he was very personable, if you will, in terms of, you know, he carried himself well. He definitely walked with confidence. and certainly came with the pedigree, if you will, that was needed for the position that he held with the organization. But when it actually came down to sitting down and talking with him about things, unless he agreed with you or you were going in the direction that he wanted you to go, he almost did a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde on you.
Interesting.
And I can recall one particular situation where I did not directly report to him, but I was in a meeting with him with one of his direct reports, and he wanted to launch a career development program with his department, which I thought, hallelujah, that's fantastic. I love hearing that, right? So he does all the right things, says all the right things. And so we were talking about what this might look like. And so his direct reports, I had worked closely with her, and so she took the lead on this presentation, and she was sharing what this process might look like for his department. And because it wasn't what he thought it should be, he almost slammed her to the wall on what she was saying. And I'm sitting right there as he's doing this. I don't know if he forgot that I was in the room or what, but he just completely turned in terms of being this wonderful guy that you wanted to talk to get me out of this room as quickly as I possibly can. And I felt so bad for his direct report because I could almost feel her sinking in her chair.
Yeah.
Because of those behaviors that he was exhibiting.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing I've learned over the years is that there was more that was triggering those behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't just that he was disagreeing to what was being said or what was being presented to him. There was a lot more going on with him. And that doesn't give him a pass for bad behavior. It certainly doesn't give him a pass for it. But it helps me to understand that I need to lean into this guy more. I need to lean into him to try to figure out what is really going on. Because first, if I'm going to work with him, I've got to figure out how to maneuver through his reactions to things. But definitely derailed the entire situation. Nothing was accomplished in that meeting.
Right.
You know, we walked away, and I literally followed back up with that direct report because I had huge concerns for her.
Nothing was accomplished, but there were definite consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The meeting did have consequences.
Absolutely had very negative consequences because in my mind, first of all, I lost respect for him immediately. I walked into that meeting with respect, but it only took a few seconds to lose it. And then I also then realized that he also had no respect for his own direct reports. You know, and so for him to, you know, especially, it's almost like that child who is scolded in public. And we know how that child feels when they're scolded in public. They are so humiliated, yet parents still scold them in the public, right? Or you're called out in the middle of something and your boss tells you you've done something wrong in front of your peers. It's the worst feeling in the world.
Shaming.
That's exactly what he did to that direct report.
Well, it's interesting because when I hear a case study like this, I immediately go to the emotional side and I think backstory. I know that, you know, in Scripture, there is a text that says that there are roots of bitterness that will spring up. So these are things that you're not expecting to happen. These are emotional surges and compulsions that you thought you had pushed down and you had it under control. But in a triggered moment, a root of bitterness springs up. It troubles and it excites, it annoys. And then he goes on in that text to say, and it will defile. It defiles, which is the word in the Greek for inking, kind of like a tattoo. It's an identity thing. It's a sense of permanence. Doesn't have to stay permanent, but that root of bitterness, as long as it's there, it will keep you in that permanence. So let's cycle back to the case study. I look at a guy like this, and you were talking about how you lost respect for him, but I promise you that guy, the CEO, he lost respect for himself. He probably didn't lose it in that moment because he had probably been losing it a piece at a time over his lifetime. Somewhere down the road, there was probably something that happened early on, and then multiplied over and over again, where scenarios of people who told him he was stupid or he wasn't enough. Somebody took the power out of what he actually felt as just a healthy human. And so in this moment, all of that that's stored in the hippocampus and the amygdala of the brain, that stuff comes firing up. And before he has a chance, because our eyes have the ability to lock in on the emotional issues of a person long before our physical body feels it, long before our rational brain comes on. So he's in that moment, and his brain, with even his eyes, come into a very narrow focus. The neurochemicals that are firing off have him now, it's fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
I'm under attack. I now must kill.
Right.
And so he is going after it. Well, in that moment, I promise you, just by my own failures, I promise you he's experiencing that with the sense of, this is the most rational thing for me to do.
Absolutely.
I need to set this straight right here, right now. But I also promise you, in 20 to 30 minutes, when the neurochemicals reset and filter out of his brain, he's sitting there thinking, what in the heck did I just do? And if he doesn't have that emotional intelligence, he's living in the stress hormones around that, not even having the ability to know that. So what you have then is somebody who is in a continual cycle of grief, loss, sorrow, and they want to do well. Like you said, he was generally just a really good guy. Well, I think about how many leaders that I've been around who are generally really good people, but at the intersection of stress and chaos, their past story comes and hijacks them.
Completely.
And you've seen that.
Completely. All the time. I mean, and that's what people remember also.
It is, isn't it?
See, they're not going to remember how great you are. They're not going to remember how wonderful you are when the waters are calm. They're going to remember the emotional hijack that they experienced with you.
So as a leader, if I'm now then thinking about this CEO person, as a leader, when we were saying that leaders first have to lead themselves, this is a prime example.
Completely.
That it doesn't matter how many podcasts, conferences, or books on leadership that he reads, if he doesn't deal with the roots of bitterness, if he doesn't deal with this inflamed emotional state, he's never going to get into a place of contented, wholehearted leadership. So leading himself for him has got to be, I got to lead out of my emotional place. I've got to find out why I do what I do.
That's right. That's why emotional intelligence, that whole thing I was talking about earlier about learning about emotional intelligence, has two key pieces in it. One is self-regulation, and the other one is self-awareness.
Interesting.
You know, because without those two, you can't do the other pieces of the emotional intelligence model, if you will.
Yeah.
And what happens is that with that self-awareness, sometimes actually, you know, you mentioned, you know, that perhaps 30 minutes later he might say, wow, what just happened?
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't even occur.
Yeah.
Because they're not seeing that what they did or the behavior they exhibited there was anything wrong with that behavior.
Yeah.
So they don't do that self-awareness check. They don't do that reflection of what just happened because of just their lack of knowledge of the fact that they are being hijacked.
Yeah.
You know, and I got to tell you, personally as a leader, I was doing that myself.
I've been hijacked.
Oh my gosh.
That's why I know about it.
Yeah, completely. You know, and it wasn't until I probably realized that how I was, you know, hijacking myself. Things from my past would surface when I was experiencing things that I really couldn't connect to others. When that was happening to them, because I didn't understand it about me.
Yeah.
So I had to learn it about me before I could possibly help anyone learn it about themselves.
Absolutely. That is so good. Well, when I talk about that, maybe 20, 30 minutes ago, he began to feel it and was discontented out of it. What you're saying is very real, that a lot of people, leaders themselves, are not self-aware. They're not tuned in to even know what's happening.
That's right.
I think we have to compare that to the other piece of that, which is it's still happening.
That's right.
The brain always knows whether you're integrated or disintegrated.
Yes.
And it has to do with conscience. There's so many different factors of how the brain functions, but when a person is leading in a way, all they know is I'm unhappy.
Yes.
and I'm angry.
Or that, wow, that didn't work.
That didn't work.
Or
yeah.
I didn't get the result that I wanted.
And even stupid people.
Yeah, exactly.
Blame the people.
Which is interesting. That's right. All the blame is going this way,
Yeah.
rather than it coming this way.
Yeah.
You know, and that's also that that defensive mechanism, right?
Yeah.
I got to throw the blame out on you, or I have to attack you first before you attack me.
Yes.
To protect me.
Yeah.
You know, and so but typically it's outward rather than inward, and we have to do more inward.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Completely, because you know what? We're the only ones that are blamed for that behavior. We have control of our behavior.
Yeah.
And no matter what, no matter who triggers us and what ways they trigger us, we still have the opportunity to self-regulate and control our behavior. You know, I just recently was dealing with someone who just completely blindsided me on something. And, you know, and I thought, okay, I can have a knee-jerk reaction to this and respond immediately, or I can put in check my emotional intelligence and say, first of all, I'm not going to win any friends by doing that, and I'm not going to resolve this in any way by doing that.
Yeah.
So I did not respond in that negative manner, and I walked away.
Which is it's amazing how much power you have in that, and yet at the moment it feels like I ought to fight. I ought to verbally tell how I think about it.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us. You might be wondering what's next. I want to encourage you to go to our website at redinkrevival.com. There you're going to find resources, retreats, upcoming special events, and a growing bank of content. Sign up for our free e-newsletter to stay abreast of all that is available. Of specific note, we're hosting our next Red Ink Revival Leadership Retreat for pastors on March 2nd through the 6th. Also note the church staff retreat is April 20th through the 24th, and our Marketplace Leaders Retreat is June 29th through July 3rd. I hope everybody can make it to one of these life-changing events. Everything we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe. I can't wait till our next episode, and I'm glad that you were with us today. We'll see you next time.